Presentation, please. Thank you. Okay. All right. So my colleagues and myself, Mr. Javane Gibbs and Ms. Sagwadi Maluleke, we put together this presentation. And in this presentation, we'll be looking at a model to support and grow Olympiads and competitions in disadvantaged areas. Now, very briefly, I will start by explaining some key concepts and some theories. I will look at two types of volunteering, report on a study that we undertook, and propose a model for supporting and growing Olympiads and competitions in disadvantaged areas. Finally, I'd like to leave you with some issues to consider regarding volunteerism. All right, so what is volunteerism? It is the unpaid giving of your time and energy by doing planned, meaningful activities. Now, it has to be for the benefit of others. It is not just membership, because membership to the Ku Klux Klan is not volunteerism. Volunteers themselves can gain skills and they can benefit through self-development. Right. Now, volunteerism is a social behavior. And because it's a social behavior, it is affected by, amongst other things, age, gender, socioeconomic status, and geography. Now, I will touch on three theories in my presentation. Firstly, the resource capital theory explains the phenomenon that those with higher social economic status, with higher education, and those with more resources are more likely to volunteer. And the issue is that how do we now get volunteerism going in disadvantaged areas? 37 volunteers, 37 volunteers from 33 countries in 2016 were surveyed, and they found that volunteerism were higher amongst the employed and those with higher education and higher income. Now, in South Africa, Siabe and Berger in 2021 found that volunteerism was unequally distributed. Most of the volunteers here are from higher socioeconomic statuses, those with higher income and more resources. But additionally, they found that several of our volunteers come from religious organizations. In South Africa, there were approximately 2.7 million volunteers in 2018. And at that time, that was a mere 4% of the population. Right, the dominant status theory explains that human societies form group-based hierarchies based on similarities, such as gender, such as economic status, such as education, and even religion. The socio-emotive selectivity theory says that people, most of us, I think in this room, 90% of us will probably identify with this, that as people age, they become more aware of issues of their limited lifespan, and they focus mostly on the present and not the future. They're not interested in more experiences to bulk up their CV, and they want to now engage in more meaningful activities. Okay, the challenge we have now is that how do we involve the youth, those with lesser resources, skills, and experiences? How do we get them to volunteer? And the issue is that most of our volunteers are sitting in your affluent areas. So how can we get volunteerism going in our less affluent areas? Okay, so we, for this paper, we undertook a survey of 54 volunteers with a competition, and we found that 66% of them understood that their biggest contribution was learner development. However, when asked about the reasons they volunteered, it gave a different picture. 48% volunteered for reasons related to themselves. So they volunteered for their own benefit and experiences. So while volunteers believe that they are helping learners, their own motivation to volunteer is not necessarily altruistic. And that is very worrying. Okay, so when asked about their experiences, most of the experiences were positive. 41% said they had no negative experiences. However, 26% of the volunteers surveyed said that there was insufficient recognition and financial reward. Now, the question is, if our volunteers want financial reward, is that volunteerism? So there are serious implications for the way we screen and select volunteers for our programs. So we also surveyed respondents who volunteered at an Olympiad. There were 8 respondents. Unfortunately, there were fewer volunteers and even fewer responses from these volunteers. And it is probably because the volunteerism at this Olympiad was less structured and they call on their volunteers on a needs basis. In 2018, the HSRC reported that there are many challenges, and as we all know, in rural areas when it comes to Olympiads and competitions, both in terms of participation and performance. So we all know that the focus on Olympiads and competitions is expansion. We want to reach more learners in all corners of the country. But our rate of expansion is way too slow. It's been 30 years. We have made progress, but is this enough? It needs to be 10 times more. And if it's 10 times more, is it going to take us 300 years? So the rate of expansion is far too slow. And apart from funding, a further limitation is that a number of these volunteers are sitting in your more affluent areas. So how do we take Olympiads and competitions to disadvantaged communities? We also have the lead agent, implementing agent model that is being rolled out. It's very valuable, but it's also slow because a further limitation is that there are far too few implementing agents in the country. Now, I want to move on away from Olympiads and competitions and just discuss some community-based organizations. One is the Lions International Club. They're very similar to the Rotary. They have 140 clubs in South Africa, very structured. They have a board. They report, their reporting mechanisms are from district to region, all the way up to international. One organization in Durban, those Lion members, 37 of them were 40 years and older, and just 4 members were below 40 years. So already you can see the age differences of those that volunteer. Right. All of them have similar social and economic statuses, and their activities are focused on education, hunger alleviation, and fundraising. And when it comes to education, for example, they do not have skilled, experienced people in their club who can take forward education. They wait for programs to come to them, which they help to roll out. Mzansi Future Professionals Foundation in Vicksburg, Free State. They are pictured on the slide. They are made up of professionals, mostly engineers, from the community. They've started a library. They do Expo training. Other programs they roll out, such as farming. And the challenge that they have is they need formal support and resources. So here's an organization based in the community waiting for programs to come to them. And finally, the Nelson Mandela Community Youth Center in Durban. They focus on hunger alleviation and education. They are structured in the sense that they have the space and they organize activities. They invite schools. And their challenge is they are looking for long-term programs. All right, so the model we propose is based on three things: the theories on volunteerism that I spoke about, the findings from our study conducted, and a review of some of the community-based organizations I just spoke about. All right, so firstly, volunteerism can be organized in two ways. To the left, you will see that in a vertical way, such as Olympiads and competitions, who work directly with the community. So let's call them the external formal agents, because that is how they work. They're from the outside, they are outsiders, right? And then you have on the right, the horizontal model, where organizations within the community assist the community. So how do we bring it all together? All right, so just some points about the differences between the two types of organizations. The characteristics are as follows. The formal external agents are regulated, driven by a policy. They have a mandate, and their motivations are based on policy framework and the objectives of these policies. They usually have paid staff and volunteers. Like I said, they are the outsiders who reach into the community, which is why their programs are often called outreach. Their programs may be short to medium term because once their projects are completed, they withdraw. And what happens is that most often, even at the school level, their interventions come to an end. They usually have resources, and the volunteers that they need, Olympiads and competitions I'm speaking about, the volunteers that they need have to have specific skills, for example, in the STEM field. Right, the community-based organizations are mostly informal, free association. Their members' motives are usually altruistic. In other words, they do it with no financial reward or recognition. They do it for purely altruistic reasons. And because of that, there is continuity, and volunteerism then becomes a renewable resource. They have access to the community. They are established, they understand, and they're accepted by the community. And they can create an enabling environment for Olympiads and competitions to work in. Now, our model, for this presentation, we've tried to come up with a simple version. So very simplistically, in this model, we propose that external formal agents such as Olympiads and competitions work through community-based organizations who are respected and well established in the community. Even where Olympiads and competitions are lead agents, even their implementing agents can work through community-based organizations. Right, so I mentioned that we tried to simplify the model for the presentation, but volunteerism is quite complex and quite layered. In this slide, the rectangles are your Olympiads and competitions, and the red ovals are your community-based organizations. And you can see the different stages in which we implement Olympiads and competitions, and where we can have both organizations working together. So if you look at the recruitment phase, for example, it's very important when it comes to identifying who your volunteers are, the screening of these volunteers, looking at their skills and their motivation. All right, and then when you look at engagement, there's orientation, which can be done by both organizations. There's training, which can be done by the Olympiads and competitions because they come with specific skills. And of course, supporting the volunteers can be by both parties as well. Of course, evaluation and retention has to be addressed by both the formal organizations and the community-based organizations. All right, so I want to leave you with some issues to consider. Firstly, our community-based organizations are based in affluent communities. So now we're starting with a problem. We want to focus on Olympiads and competitions for disadvantaged areas. How do we release volunteers that do not deliver on the organization's objectives? How do you deal with volunteers whose motivation is not aligned with the principles of volunteerism? How do you ensure commitment? What about liability and legal issues when it comes to volunteers? We need to vet STEM volunteers, especially because they're working with learners. And there is a misconception that volunteerism is free. We need resources, time and energy to orientate, to train, to monitor, administer our volunteers. Now, incentivizing is important. It encourages our volunteers to contribute, but incentivizing can create expectations. So the question is how much and what incentives are appropriate? And of course, we must not expect our external agents, our Olympiads and competitions to go into communities and solve the community's problems. They have a specific mandate. All right. And if you go into communities where they are struggling with certain issues, like they don't have running water, for example, are they going to prioritize your STEMI initiatives? And finally, how can communities themselves provide an enabling environment for external agents to work? Now, if you look at some examples of our community-based organizations, I spoke about 3. And then if you look at the biography of Prof. Tebogo, the keynote speaker yesterday, she's also founded a community-based organization that promotes STEM careers and focusing mostly on girls. So there you have a community-based organization, and then we have the Olympiads and competitions sitting at a different level, and there is that disjunct. The question is, why are we always doing these things in isolation, in compartments, in parallel, and we seem to be running on the spot, and we're not making much progress? All right, so to summarize, to accelerate our growth and supporting Olympiads and competition in disadvantaged areas, we need a blended model. We need to pull all the resources together. And the model we propose is where Olympiads and competitions work through established community-based organizations who are accepted by the community. The community has earned their trust and they tend to be more self-sustainable. Community-based organizations are mostly based in affluent communities, like you've seen, and their work in other communities may not be sustainable. So, for self-sustainability, what is one option? That disadvantaged communities can initiate and establish volunteer organizations. They do not need to have resources. They do not need to have skills. They just need to have these organizations with the skills. For example, even your religious organizations, okay? And Olympiads and competitions, they bring the skills and the resources, they provide the support, they provide the training, and they gain access through community structures. If you hear challenges about Olympiads and competitions, the biggest challenge is access, getting in there. And apart from access is when you withdraw, what happens? It must not collapse, it must be self-sustainable. All right. So disadvantaged communities must support and provide an enabling environment for these agents to work in. So, okay, that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
How many?
It is 2 eyes.
I didn't see it.
So when you break wood, here, right? At the bottom here, right? Those